I want you to imagine something. A wolf spots an injured elk. The elk is exhausted. It can barely run. The wolf closes the distance, brings the animal down, and begins eating while it is still alive. Nobody watching would call the wolf evil. Now imagine a human doing the same thing. The reaction changes instantly. One is nature. The other feels monstrous. For a long time, humans have treated cruelty as something that belongs almost exclusively to us. Animals kill because they have to. Humans kill because they choose to. At least that is the story we tell ourselves. But every so often, an animal does something that makes that distinction feel less certain. An orca launches a seal into the air repeatedly before finally letting it sink beneath the waves. A dolphin spends hours harassing a smaller marine mammal without any obvious reward. A chimpanzee carries out a coordinated attack against a member of a rival group long after the outcome is no longer in doubt. When stories like these appear, people often reach for the same explanation. Maybe some animals are psychopaths. The idea sounds absurd. Psychopathy is a human psychological condition. Animals do not sit in therapists' offices. They do not answer questionnaires. No lion has ever been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Yet the question refuses to go away. Because when scientists began studying psychopathy more closely, they discovered that several traits associated with it are not uniquely human. And once you start looking for those traits in nature, you find some surprisingly familiar patterns. The first problem is that psychopathy is often misunderstood. Movies tend to portray psychopaths as criminal masterminds who spend their lives plotting elaborate schemes. Real psychopathy is much less dramatic. Researchers generally describe it as a collection of traits: reduced empathy, fearlessness, a tendency toward manipulation, a weak sense of guilt. Many people who score highly on psychopathy tests never commit violent crimes. The important point is not violence, it is how a mind responds to other minds, and that creates an enormous challenge. How do you measure that in an animal? Scientists cannot ask a dolphin whether it feels remorse. They cannot interview a tiger about empathy. Instead, they have to look for clues hidden in behavior. One of the strongest clues comes from something surprisingly simple. If one individual becomes distressed, does anyone else care? Human beings begin showing signs of this almost immediately after birth. A crying infant can trigger distress in other infants nearby. The emotional state of one individual spreads through the group. For a long time, many researchers assumed this was uniquely human. Then they started running experiments. Rats that encounter trapped companions will often work to free them, even when there is no obvious reward. Elephants sometimes linger beside injured herd members for hours. Certain primates appear visibly agitated when close companions suffer. Even laboratory mice react differently when the pain is experienced by a familiar animal rather than a stranger. None of this proves that animals experience empathy exactly as humans do. What it does suggest is that many species are not emotionally indifferent to one another. The suffering of another individual can matter. And if empathy exists, an interesting possibility follows. Could some individuals possess less of it than others? Nature is full of variation. Researchers studying fish have repeatedly found that some individuals charge toward unfamiliar situations while others consistently hang back. These differences are often remarkably stable over time. In other words, animals appear to have personalities. Not personalities in the human sense of favorite movies and political opinions, but consistent behavioral tendencies that make one individual predictably different from another. Once that idea became accepted, scientists began asking a new question. Could traits resembling psychopathy simply represent one end of a broader behavioral spectrum? Evolution provides a reason to think they might. A population made entirely of cautious individuals misses opportunities. A population made entirely of fearless individuals eventually gets itself killed. Natural selection often favors a mixture, which means traits that seem harmful in one context can become useful in another. Fearlessness is a perfect example. In humans, unusually low fear can contribute to psychopathic behavior. Yet in nature, the same characteristic can help an animal secure food, territory, mates, and status. This brings us to chimpanzees. For decades, many people imagined that violence on the scale of human warfare required something uniquely human. Then researchers began documenting chimpanzee societies in greater detail. The picture became more complicated. Chimpanzees form alliances, compete for status, and remember past interactions. When conflicts erupt between neighboring groups, the violence can be startlingly organized. Members of larger patrols sometimes seek out isolated rivals, attacking only when victory appears nearly certain. To human observers, the strategy feels disturbingly familiar, yet calling these animals psychopaths creates a problem. Their actions still serve clear evolutionary purposes. Territory expands, resources become easier to access, opportunities for reproduction increase. The violence may be brutal, but it is not necessarily pointless, and that distinction matters. One reason people find psychopathy unsettling is the apparent disconnect between suffering and purpose. When cruelty appears detached from practical goals, it feels fundamentally different. This is where dolphins enter the conversation. Dolphins possess some of the largest brains relative to body size in the animal kingdom. They recognize themselves in mirrors. They solve complex problems. Social relationships can persist for years. Researchers have documented temporary alliances, shifting coalitions, and forms of cooperation that require sophisticated social awareness. Yet dolphins also have a reputation for behavior that can seem deeply unsettling. In several locations around the world, dolphins have been observed attacking porpoises. The incidents do not appear connected to feeding. The victims are often left uneaten. Scientists still debate the underlying cause. Competition, redirected aggression, and social dynamics have all been proposed. What nobody can say with certainty is what the dolphins are experiencing internally, and that uncertainty points toward the biggest obstacle in the entire discussion. Behavior alone is not enough. Imagine two people performing the exact same action. One feels intense guilt afterward. The other feels nothing. From the outside, the behavior looks identical. Internally, the experiences could not be more different. Psychopathy is largely about what happens inside the mind. That inner world remains difficult to access even in humans. Accessing it in animals is vastly harder. A cat playing with a mouse offers a perfect example. To us, the scene looks cruel. The mouse repeatedly escapes and is recaptured. The suffering seems obvious, but the cat may not be deriving pleasure from suffering itself. The behavior could simply reflect hunting instincts that evolved over millions of years. What appears sadistic from a human perspective may be something entirely different from the cat's perspective. The danger is that humans are exceptionally good at projecting human motives onto non-human minds. We see intention where none exists. We imagine emotions that may not be present. We assume familiar mental processes behind unfamiliar behaviors. Scientists spend enormous effort trying to avoid that trap. The more they learn, the stranger the picture becomes. Animal minds are neither simple versions of human minds nor completely alien systems. They occupy an uncomfortable middle ground, which brings us back to the original question. Are there psychopaths among animals? At the moment, nobody knows. There are certainly animals that display traits associated with psychopathy. Some individuals appear unusually fearless, others seem exceptionally aggressive. A few exhibit levels of social manipulation that would be impressive in a corporate boardroom. What remains uncertain is whether those traits combine into the same psychological package that exists in humans. The answer may eventually turn out to be yes. It may turn out to be no. Either possibility would teach us something important. Because the real mystery is not whether animals resemble us. The real mystery is where the resemblance ends. Psychopathy may eventually turn out to be another example of a trait we once believed belonged exclusively to humans. For now, all we can say is this. The next time you watch an animal do something that feels cruel, remember that cruelty is not just an action. It is also a state of mind. And while scientists have become surprisingly good at observing what animals do, the thoughts behind those actions remain one of the last great mysteries on Earth.